Professor Liversage. Please, we have Professor Liversage.
I'm not a professor, but I'm happy to have become one today.
Yeah. We are going to tackle the issue of marriages and divorces in ethnic minorities, families in Denmark, which will be tackled by Anika Liversage. So please, I'm so sorry that I forgot about.
Well, thank you for having me here, and thank you for a very interesting day so far. And I think my presentation will add quite nicely to the complexities of coexisting systems of different kinds. Here we heard that you have to be 18 to marry, but sometimes due to tradition, for instance, underage marriages occur. Or you have, in the historical presentation, this duality of Jewish and Muslim systems and ability to shop between them, for instance, in some occasions. And we have a lot of that going on in what I'm going to present off today. I am a senior researcher at SFI, the Danish National Center for Social Research. One of the things that we do is that we make investigations for the ministries. And in 2011, we were asked to do an empirical investigation of what they called parallel legal systems in Denmark with a focus on Sharia law. That was the wording of the assignment. And it was especially with a focus on women's rights or the lack of their rights to access to divorce. So the ministry were in a hurry. We had 3.5 months from we got the assignment till they had to have the draft report, which is pretty hard when they also wanted us to do field work in all major immigrant groups and across all of Denmark, and as it is a topic that nobody had really investigated before. But we did manage to make a lot of interviews. They were at various depths. We could tape and transcribe some of them, but the majority was sort of semi-structured interviews where people were taking notes, and we were both out talking with professionals. We were talking with religious specialists. The focus was on the ethnic minorities in Denmark, and they are predominantly Muslim, and that was also the focus of the investigation. But there was also this heavy political weight on the sort of interest in the, I can say it here, the sort of the bad Muslims and the weird things they do. So we took great pains both to include Catholic and Jewish religious authorities and to include, for instance, Tamils as ethnic minorities, because they're not Muslim, they are Catholic or Hindu. And the major piece of the data was talking with ethnic minorities living in Denmark who had various experiences. And the only reason we could do that in such a short time was that I got an excellent staff of young people of sort of second generation background who spoke between them a lot of different languages and had lots of networks, because you needed to have contacts to be able to talk about something as sort of sensitive as having a Muslim divorce in such a short span of time. They ended up talking with this is in Danish because it's taken from the report, but they ended up talking with these 156 individuals, and then they were also asking for like close relatives or close friends who'd had experiences that were relevant, and we use that as what we call the sort of second-hand data. And of the countries, we do have some people from Morocco. They're here grouped with Algeria and Egypt, but that was 12 people. The bigger groups were like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Turkey and Iraq. But that's also the really big groups in Denmark. One of the problems of making this investigation was how to talk about the issue, because it was about the coexistence of religious rituals regarding relationships and then legally binding marriages under Danish law and the subsequent divorces. And in public debate as well as in academic research, you talk about Muslim marriages and Muslim divorces. The problem is here that marriage as a word indicates some sort of legal bindingness, and a divorce the same, that this bond is absolved. And the thing was that when you use that term, sometimes you get a Muslim marriage that's not legally binding. And then what is it then? And I was discussing it with a civil servant because I had to write a report and you have to use a word. And she was saying, you're not going to use the word marriage for this sort of thing. You can call it a religious ritual without any legal validity. Okay, I said, so what happens if you get a religious ritual with no legal validity and you then have something done to make it not be there anymore? Like the divorce, what are you going to call it? She said, that's not my problem, that's yours. And I ended up calling, just sort of use the native language of anthropologist approach, nikah for a Muslim marriage. I mean, you'd be able to understand that in this room, and then a nikah dissolution. Then you simply can say you have two different ways of talking. You have a marriage and divorce tied to Danish law, and you have a nikah and nikah dissolution for the sort of religious side of it. And of course this is to do with Islam. If you had a Hindu ritual and a dissolution subsequently, which you wouldn't be able to get, you'd have a different terminology, but now we talk about Islam here. So, according to our data material, and that's not surprising, but you can have this nikah with you in different ways. Of course, you can have married in your country of origin, and then when you come to Denmark, you've got your nikah documents, and they are turned into a marriage in Denmark, because they're valid in Denmark too. So that's one way where you've had one ritual marrying you in your country of origin, and it's valid in Denmark. You can also have a nikah in Denmark by an imam who is authorized to give you a nikah that is also legally valid under Danish law. And then you're only married once. But the most common thing, according to our material, which is qualitative, but that's also what we find in other sources, in general, if you have a nikah in Denmark, you have a nikah separately, and then you also go to the town hall and you have a Danish marriage. And then you have two separate rituals and you become fully married, both according to the religion and according to Danish law. In some cases, it happened more or less at the same time. Some groups did it one way around and some groups did it the other way around. And finally, of course, you can just go have a nikah. And it's not legally valid, and from the eyes of the Danish state, you are then not married. Here I just want to very briefly outline the Danish context of marriage. On average, and this is pure statistics, a young Danish woman will have her first intercourse when she's 16 years old, still living at home with her parents. She leaves the parental home when she's around 19, and will often at some stage in her 20s enter into a long-lasting relationship, having her first child when she's 29 years old. If she then decides to marry with this father of the child, because now they have a family because they have a child, then the average marriage age, first marriage, is 31 years. So you've got a long stretch from sort of beginning your life as an adult and then marrying, because marriage in Denmark is now, for the majority, the celebration of a fully formed family, more than sort of the beginning of something you have to do before you can even move together. And that's the context that the ethnic minorities in Denmark sort of are embedded in. So what we get of relationships here is a typology. You can say, are they married according to Danish law, and do they have a nikah? Well, in some cases, you get no ritualization whatsoever. That would be Danes just moving together, as they do in their early 20s, for instance. You can also just be married according to Danish law. That might even happen in a church, then it's also religious, or in the town hall. You might also just have the nikah, and that's similar to being just an unmarried cohabiting couple in a Danish context, or you can be married in both ways. And that's the type of relationships I'm going to deal with henceforth, because it has to do with the complexities of the interplay between state law and sort of religious understandings. There are a number of different reasons why people choose to have a nikah. It can be just for them to be together, and I won't tell you too much about the good reasons. The religion prescribes that you need to have a nikah before you can have a relationship. In other cases, interviewees said, well, you know, they want to follow tradition. It's a beautiful thing. It's their way to have their relationship made official. Some people did it explicitly because of religious beliefs. That might be, for instance, a convert to Islam of Danish majority background. She wouldn't have any traditional reasons, and she wouldn't have any parents wanting her to have a niqab before she could have a relationship. And then it could be very explicitly religiously motivated. In some cases, it was parents who required it. We even did have cases of more or less shotgun nikahs, where parents found out something and had an imam come and wed the couple very fast because they were doing stuff they weren't supposed to do. And again, then you have the reasons of transnational mobility, that you cannot go to the country of origin as an unmarried couple because then you get into trouble, so you'll have a nikah to sort of get your papers right. And of course you can have several reasons for this at once. So it's all very complex, and you'll have different people doing it for different reasons. And coming back to the class issue, of course, it's also very, very different what scope of liberty you have to decide yourself, or whether you're bound by, let's say, family constraints to do one thing or the other. Now we come to the dissolving nikahs. And here, of course, if you have the double ritual where you both have the nikah and the Danish marriage, then if you want to leave that relationship, you can ask two questions. Has the couple been divorced according to Danish law? And has the couple had the nikah dissolved? That gives us a similar sort of typology. If it's two no's, then it's a fully married couple. That's really quite an important square, because a lot of immigrant women in Denmark who might want to leave bad marriages are unable to do so, not because they can't get their nikah dissolved, but simply because they can't leave the marriage due to norms, due to their resources, due to threats from the husband or their own parents in some cases, and in some cases also due to the Danish laws on residence permit, which might keep you in a bad place because you'll be afraid of being thrown out of Denmark in case of divorce. We do have exceptions that you can or you should be able to get a residency permit if you leave your relationship because of violence, but there are certain reasons why you might not be able to be sure of whether it applies to you. And then that can as well keep people from leaving bad relationships. We just recently published quite a big study on the situation for ethnic minority children in Denmark in case of divorce. And that's really quite an important square because many marriages last for very long. Can I get a water bottle? That's sort of a new one. Thank you. Okay. If you end up down in the lower square, that's when you get divorced according to both systems. And then you've got, especially the top one over there, is what you usually call the limping marriages. And the limping marriages, as you'll also know from sort of Catholic, that's where you also use the term, it's because you have in some ways ended the marriage, but it's not fully done with. If you are an ethnic minority woman in Denmark who wants to leave a marriage, you can file a case in Danish statsforvaltning. You can apply to have a divorce. There'll usually be a waiting time, longer if the husband doesn't want to sign the papers. But after a while, usually it'd be 12 years. I don't know, they changed the laws recently, and I'm not totally into that. But you can. 6 months now. Okay. You can single on your own. You can end your marriage, and you don't have to have reasons for it. And you can have it over and done with according to Danish law, as a woman as well. But that might not be the case under getting the nikah dissolved, and then you can end up being married according to Islam, but not according to Danish law. Indeed, we did have some cases of the other constellation, where, for instance, a man gave a talak, and off he went, but he wouldn't support his wife getting the Danish marriage dissolved so she could be stuck for a longer time. It was simply a way of getting back to somebody you weren't happy with. But this is the one I'll concentrate on in the last bit. Okay, dissolving a nikah, yeah. I like the audience. I mean, I've had this slide up with a majority Danish audience and nobody sort of got it. So, yes, dissolving a nikah, there is unequal access for men and women. A man can say talaq 3 times, etc., etc. That's sort of the very headline of it, because there are very big differences in practices. And that where it comes down to here. We've got, I mean, if you were talking about differences within Morocco, that's just one country. Here we got umpteen different ethnic minority groups. We've got first generations and second generations. We've got lots of different levels of education and knowledge. So you get a lot of big differences in practices. But we do have, as in England as well and elsewhere, we do have Danish imams who measure out nikah dissolutions, but on different grounds. So the question here becomes that the men aren't in such a squeeze. If they want to leave a marriage, they can leave a marriage. But what do the women do if, let's say, the husband is gone and she's stuck and she wants to end the marriage or just wants to get out of it even if he's around? It seems to be very strongly tied to women's resources and the levels of support they can get in order to how free they are to act, but also to the understanding of what it takes to have their nikah dissolved. Exactly on the interplay with Danish law and the interplay with getting a Danish divorce, the question becomes, does a divorce in Danish family court always dissolve the nikah simply sort of automatically? One group where the answer is yes is among the Turks in Denmark. And that must be understood in relation to the Turkish legal code, which is secular. So if you marry in Turkey, you marry both sort of secularly and in general you'd go to an imam because you'll be a Muslim, so you'll have the two rituals, just like you'd have it in Denmark. And if you divorce in Turkey, which you don't do very much because the norms against divorce are strong, but if you do divorce, it's a court matter, and the court sort of finishes the whole marriage. So they have the same here in Denmark also because the majority of the Turkish imams are stationed by the Turkish state and paid by them, and they are obliged to follow the Turkish law on this matter, which makes it illegal and in fact punishable, for instance, to have a nikah without having a secular marriage. There were some others that did prescribe to this, and then it becomes a matter of interpretation and who can say, well, I think it's right, but it depends again on then your community if they accept that understanding. The next thing was, what if you go to the family court and the husband in family court signs the paper saying, I agree to the divorce? Is that signature then the same as saying, I divorce you 3 times? Can that be taken as then dissolving the nikah? Some of the imams, for instance, they said yes, it does, because that's showing the intention to divorce the wife. And some say, no, the two systems are totally separate, it doesn't matter at all. And that then becomes the last version, where the two systems are understood as totally separate, and that's, of course, the cases where the limping marriages are the worst. But if the husband doesn't want to sign the papers, the wife can still get the Danish divorce, and then she'll still be stuck in that position. So what about these women who had a nikah, they wanted to have it dissolved? What could they do? Because they haven't got any sort of authority to go to the way they would have in their country of origin. Well, people were talking a lot about that. One woman here was saying, in Islam, marriage is beautiful and sacred. It means a lot to our faith, in our faith. That is the way many imams, they keep a distance when it comes to divorce. So in the beginning, it was really difficult for me to find an imam who wanted to talk about divorce and my rights. Many want to help if you want to get married, but when you want a divorce, nobody wants to help. That's one of the issues. You know, the women are just sort of stuck with it on their own and have to find out, well, what can I do? What is right in my case? And then some imams, they do give a nikah dissolution. Sort of overall, it's often We heard about it in cases where women's families weren't unable to sort it out themselves, because in many cases it was simply within the families that they sort of negotiated, and they then maybe convinced the guy to say the talaq, or what about the money, etc. But if you had family migrants with no family, no parents, no good relations in Denmark except the husband they wanted to leave, they could really need the support of an imam to get them out of a marriage. And again, depending on what the imam, what sort of his understanding was, there need to be reasons. You need to be able to document the husband, for instance, being violent, being a substance abuse, having a substance abuse, or having left the wife. And in some cases as well, there were reconciliation needed to have taken place before the imam would give the nikah dissolution. And then we come to the forum shopping. And that's of course something that then can take place in this environment, because there are different imams, different places to go, but it depends on whether you have the resources to do such a shopping, or whether you're just sort of very isolated within your own environment and have to do what whatever local authority there is, tells you to do. We had one nice quote here from a young Iraqi woman who she was born and raised in Denmark, and she wanted to leave this quite short-lived marriage to nikah to a young man. So she contacts an imam who tells that she will need to document the rumors she says her husband has spread regarding her. And, you know, she encounters these demands, and then she doesn't think it is the right thing to do. She contacts 3 imams in Iraq whom friends have recommended. These imams are very modern, and one is known from television. I like this one. So, okay, you find somebody else, and this one imam tells a woman her husband shouldn't do as he has done, and after the phone conversation, the woman gets a paper stating she's divorced. And that's a lot easier than having to document it in front of a Danish imam, for instance, and that was a solution in her situation. And if it's accepted by her community, if it's not a problem if she wants to marry again, then you can say, well, it worked. So it's a lot about the local interpretations. Then you get the economic challenges, and I'll have to rush a bit, and all this about the mahar. Will you get the mahar? Is this written down but you can't enforce it? Can you then sue to get the mahar? That hasn't been very successful in a Danish context. But we also heard, for instance, of a family negotiating that the young guy then gave the woman the mahar, but then when she had gotten that, she went sued the guy under Danish law, and he hadn't counted on that, so he felt a little bit like, you know, she'd gotten the better of him. Remember, when people leave each other, they're usually can be very nasty, and some cases as well we heard, especially of course men having the upper hand and being able to blackmail women to pressure them to pay a lot of money before they'd sort of let the wife go. And in many cases there are no money. I mean, in many cases we have families that are just poor. It might be more or less getting out of it without getting the other person's debt with you. That's the main issue. And then we get the transnational challenges. In some cases, you know, you've got the 3 hoops to jump through. First, you need a divorce in a family court in Denmark. Then you need to get the nikah dissolved one way or the other. And then you need to get the court case in the country of origin. In some cases, we heard that mosques in Denmark were making documents that would be legally valid in the country of origin. And here there has been, after this report, they have started out, as far as I'm aware, more sort of discussions. How can we sort this out bilaterally, because it has to be bilaterally, so that people can have a slightly easier path to fully ending their relationships. Time-consuming, difficult, also due to the time and distances involved. So I have a few things on that in English. The report itself is well available in Danish at SFI's homepage. And with those words, I will say thank you.